Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you for coming here. The topic is very acute. The role of the state in the energy sphere. Mainly, we are going to speak about regulation of the market. There are different opinions on the monopoly and who is the main monopolist and who are the main players in the market. Regulation, investment, and creation of conditions for investment. This is very acute issue. And with our international American partners, we communicated on this and how to attract investment. Big money should be attracted and international players should be there in the market, and it will develop our market and create more civilized approach in the sphere of regulation. We have a situation here, and this is an emergency situation. That's why we are going to speak about it. I'm Dmytro Vasyliev, and I'm Deputy General Director at the Center for Energy Research. And today we have our guests here. And we expect two more guests, one from the ministry and one from the expert community, who was the member of the Commission of Energy. And we don't have the minister and the head of Energy Commission, but they were not able to come. But we have here Sergiy, Chekh, advisor to the Ministry of Energy and Coal Industry of Ukraine. Shukru, Bogut, senior energy advisor, USAID Office of Energy. And Sviatoslav Pavliuk, expert on energy efficiency, with a very clear view of the role of the state in the regulation of the energy, and also Dmytro Tsekhmister, who will join us later, head of the Reform of Electric Energy Market Office at the Ministry of Energy and Coal Industry of Ukraine, and the Gerus, expert on energy issues. And I told you about the agenda, and I would like to remind to our speakers that we have direct broadcast, and we have English translation here. And with this, I want to start. First, I ask Sergiy Mikhailovich Chekh to start our discussion and to express his opinion, and maybe we are going to speak about the state as the monopolist in the market, if you share, of course, this opinion. Thank you. It's a very good issue. The role of the state in the energy sphere in Ukraine. Because we should remember about the role of energy sector in the economy of the country. All of us, we understand that the role of energy in the economy of Ukraine is great, and it will only increase. And energy should be transformed, and it will be more liberal, more market-oriented, but it can be changed somehow in the administrative sphere. And some renewable sources should be used more, but we see that energy is one of the most important spheres, and the role of state enterprises is one component, and the regulatory role of the state is also important. State bodies that administer and provide governmental policy, and the regulator and the Energy Commission that regulates the rules, establish tariffs for different groups of consumers, and state enterprises, I think, is important issue, but maybe it's not the topic of our discussion. But this segment is represented by powerful state enterprises, Energatom, Ukrgaz, Ukraine, with 100% of capital and of the state, and also supply companies And some words on the role of the state in this sphere. You say about, you told us about emergency situation that continues, and I have already said that we get accustomed to the situation, but maybe we have different opinions on this. But nothing special is going on at the moment. We have standard frequencies. We follow all the all the obligations and with different energy systems, and we don't have some cuts and some limitations. Maybe they restrict some supply to those who have huge indebtedness, but this is a redistribution of the products and also payment for this products. The mechanisms should be improved, and now there's a meeting of the Council of Energy Market Players, and they speak about accountability and market research, but this body that unites those representatives of those enterprises who produce and redistribute energy. But for the last 3 years, the law is being introduced on the energy market, on the regulator, where its functions are interpreted differently, and I know all these projects very well. And the situation, the law on the market, say that the situation, if there's emergency situation, it's something that this is an event with the loss of considerable territories and the destruction and systemic distress, and this situation can happen because of different reasons, and it can happen due to technical reasons, mainly cutoff of powerful sources of energy or communication lines, and the situation should be improved to the balance level and to the restoration of generation, to restore the system and to provide all the necessary means to restore the system. And you can address Article 16 for this issue. And as I understand that emergency situation, there shouldn't be any emergency situation. And this emergency situation where there's no prospects for the provision of power supply, and we should take all the appropriate measures, both in the energy markets, but also in the sphere of import and export of resources, and this is one of the opportunities to influence the market. Also, a different regime of the work of enterprises and institutions. If we have some difficulties in the hours where the load is high, and if you follow the events, that you may know that unsanctioned intrusion in the work of Obelenерgo by hackers, hacker attack in Carpathians, and then because of this and there's enough fuel, but the market doesn't work in such a case. That's why some emergency situations can appear, and the draft law provides the means how to deal in this situation, and also those who write these laws, they will consult the regulator. And if we are speaking about emergency situation, we have in the code on electric lines, we have this law will envisage the development of rules of safety of supply. And I think that I took a lot of time, and taking this opportunity to speak and taking part in this discussion, I would like to tell you several words about the conditions and rules that we need, and about the cooperation that we need. Thank you, Sergiy Mikhailovich. And maybe we were joined by Mr. Gerus. Now the floor is yours.
Energy Industry Research Center for inviting me. I am the Senior Energy Advisor at USAID in the US Embassy. And I prepared some remarks on the government's role in the energy sector of Ukraine with perspective of EU integration and market development. The successful transformation into a competition and the EU energy directives-based energy sector requires very close cooperation among the government entities, independent energy regulator, and the sector stakeholders, such as today. And at this time, there are two main legislation acts, and on the law of regulator and the law of the electricity market that needs to be adopted by the parliament. And both legislations will set forth for the development of the set forth development by the government stakeholders and adoption by the independent regulator. A number of secondary legislations, including technical and market rules of the electricity market, for the implementation of the electricity law, such as the bilateral OTC or over-the-counter market, day-ahead planning, day-ahead markets, intraday trading, balancing market, ancillary services market, and market closing house for the trade settlements and the payments. And similar developments are needed for the establishment of the competitive gas markets in Ukraine as well. And these activities overall will create demand for more energy professionals, such as certified energy traders, to work on the power exchanges that will be coming up in the years. The goal of the market transformation is to establish competition in the generation of electricity, production of gas, and import of these commodities as supply, and energy, and then end user retail supply area, the competition, and the regulated portions of the market will be the transmission and the distribution areas. And this will provide energy security, reliability, and affordability to all Ukrainians. And established markets in Ukraine will also need to connect with the European electricity and the gas networks for more energy security. And it's important that the government to take the initiative in the energy policy and the energy strategy area by utilizing what we call the evidence-based methodologies such as least cost generation planning and the forecasting of energy supply and demand, and then engage in broad public consultations. And these efforts will also need to address increasing the share of the renewable energy and provide Ukraine a transition pathway for the low carbon development. So these are my initial comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bogut.
These were good considerations from the side of International Financial Organization and also the situation that now exists in Ukraine, and we should pay a lot of attention to these issues. And also we now speak, we give the floor to Mr. Pavliuk. Thank you. In my presentation, I would like to pay your attention not on all the market, but there are some structures that work in this sphere, licensing tariffs and lobbying. But I would like to tell you about consumers, because their interests are not represented. So the function of the state is to lobby the interest of the consumers against monopolies, not vice versa. And I would like to pay your attention how the state uses the money to support different activities and how it is reflected on consumption. And the problem, and everyone in Ukraine understands that one of the main problems of Ukrainian energy is high consumption due to the fact that there are great losses in the buildings and also in transmission of the energy, and it can't be only compensated by subsidies, but people should reduce their consumption. And as to how we spend public money in the country. Next slide, please. If you look at the budget of the last year, how we financed energy efficiency, and the sum of subsidies for communal services was about 24.5 billion hryvnias, and also there were subsidies for buying of fuels, and this money was paid not in cash, but it was for the population to buy solid fuels, for the population that do not have access to centralized networks or to the gas. And we spent for this, and overall we spent 25.3 billion hryvnias. But this figure is maybe like this. So as to energy efficiency, we had different activities for 342 million hryvnias, but half of this money was transferred for this year. So if we look at the volume and on the data, the communal services, all the bills, they were for 51 billion hryvnias. And what is included? There are 8 components. So cold water, hot water, energy supply, centralized heating, and also we have 18 different indicators, but this 8 is they are concerned with those cases that are connected with buildings where we live. And we know about the subsidies in 2 sectors. This is about, we know total sum. On the whole, if we are speaking about cold water and sewage, hot water, and this is done through local budgets. We don't know correct sum of money. And if we are speaking about, we have 51 billion, and what was spent by people and by the budget. And we may see that the population paid 25.7 billion and subsidies for 25.3. So we have a situation where the state buys half of the bill of the population. And if we take into account that part of water service and also other activities, it can be subsidized by local budgets. So the population pays even less. And I was present at one of the meetings of the council in the city of Kiev Oblast, and in my presence, the deputies they spent about half of their budget to compensate for the services of local water supply. Everyone wants to be good and to show people that they care. That's why they try to give the money from the budget. And this practice is widespread, and someday it will lead to very bad results, and the cost of service will be much higher. So what about the distribution? If we see that it is split about by half, and if we divide the people who get subsidy and do not get subsidy, so 25.3 billion is spent for 5.4 million hryvnias and 25.7 billion for 11.2 million people. So those who get the subsidies, so the division is nearly the same, but the total number of people is twice as high. So those people who do not get subsidies, they consume twice less than those people who get subsidies. That's why this scheme of the subsidies, it plays against energy efficient projects. And if the state intervene in all these bills for communal services, so market situation is distorted in such a way. And now countries compete not only by goods and services, but by business model. And our business model in communal services, it is spending time, spending money for those things that are not needed, but we should warm our house and we should spend money for energy efficiency, not just like this, as I have shown to you. And in this way, you know that it's very difficult to invest into projects of energy efficiency, but we should warm our houses, because you know that there will be some rise in the cost of the supplies, and it will create some problems. We know that the average consumption in Europe about 920, and we should reduce to 40 kilowatt for 1 square meter till 2013. So we should reduce consumption of the energy in our houses. And I would like to pay your attention and to draw your attention that those subsidies and benefits, they are not the only instrument of the participation of the state to support poor population. We have cross subsidies of energy market, and due to the high tariffs for production and also low tariff for nuclear generation, we have about 40 billion hryvnias that state spent by reducing the price for the population. So we have the situation when Energoatom goes to EBRD to get some money for reconstruction of blocks, and from the other side we get much more to donate this money to population, and we have the same situation. The gas market, we give gas to the population at a lower prices, and then we but we should force people to lower the consumption of resources, and any discrimination of Ukrainian producers, and in this way we will have high bills and low production. So that's why the resource that, and if I turn back to the slide, to the last slide, we may see it means that today population from the old volume of the market, it pays 25.7 from, so we pay for real services, they pay only for about 20%. So these figures are so terrible, but this is mathematics. It looks like this, and real market price. Of course, we can fight tariffs. We can fight corruption in the sphere of generation, but every time the consumer never controls the prices of the supplier, and it can control the volume of consumption in such a way by this volume of consumption can pressure the supplier and the producer. And as it is in other countries, the territory of different rules in the EU, it brought the price down for the energy supplies, and the state should protect consumers by different than subsidies, mechanism different than subsidies. We should discuss not tariffs, but we should create conditions for the population that they could save and spend money where it is effective. So if we bought this gas for market price and got the profit, there would be the fight how to create a situation where the money could be earned by this, and that could be more strategic for Ukraine, because formation of this energy efficiency fund and spending money for this, and plus also there should be fund created for the energy efficiency, and that would change the conditions and improve the situation for consumers of the services of this market. Thank you. It gives us clear understanding how much money is there in the market and how we spend them. And this highlights the role of the state in the situation. So please, the next speaker. Good afternoon. Thank you for invitation to this roundtable. And I would like to speak about investment in energy sphere, investment in the industry on the whole, and about the process of privatization that is carried out during 2 years, and that some preparation stage is done, but we should analyze the situation and the results it gives. And also in the sphere of international investments, that is very acute issue for us now, and it is important from the side of the economy, because if we look at European states that are our neighbors, and they made economic breakthrough in 15 years. I'm speaking about Poland and Turkey. These are countries that made this due to foreign investment. And internal investment, they are always limited, and they are some sort specific. And if we are speaking about Ukraine, who are those investors here in Ukraine, local investors, I mean? And we can count them on fingers of one hand, and all the investments that are provided and all that is done, it's too little. And these are assets that were provided by privatization, not that were created and modernized and effectively used. And the other factor, that investments will increase the number of players in the market, and it naturally will create a situation for demonopolization and de-oligarchization of the state that is carried out by different means now. And also selling of state companies and reduction of corruption, that is very popular issue nowadays. And also it influences such things as currency exchange, because the course is made in the market, but also the state regulates this issue. And the investor can come here and buy an enterprise and invest in this enterprise. And this inflow of the currency, it has direct influence on the exchange rate, and this is very important for us, both for the energy and for the economy of the country on the whole. And we know that the company Center Energo company was preparing for privatization, but the process of preparation and the results of this, they are such that we should speak on this in detail. And also maybe one of the main potential buyers of this enterprise Center Energo, which was Gaz de France, a French company, and now it is called Engie. And for the last 1.5 years, they had several meetings with our public servants in the sphere of energy. And Mr. Dmytro met with them, but the rhetorics and, let's say, emotions or assessments of the minister were such that after that, the representatives of this company, they didn't understand whether we have privatization at all, whether they are welcome here. And they conducted a meeting with Mr. Abramovich, and he explained to them that really the Ministry of is ready for cooperation, and they should go further to the assessment process and to work on this project. But then Mr. Demchyshin, he met with them in Houston in the United States, and there he was telling them about the risks, what can be expected in Ukraine, and it doesn't provide the opportunity to attract investments. And also the head of the commission had the same rhetorics, and in the news we see that it goes like that this company won't be privatized and the company maybe will be bankrupted, and because of the debts that are accumulated and are bought and consolidated by different groups. And let's say that there's some quality indicators about the processes, but also there are quantitative indicators, and we may look what is going on with the company, and it will look at financial results of Centrenergo. The income in 2014 was 487 million, and in the next year they lost 82 million hryvnias. So, and this is the market where independent regulator establishes rules, and the company and if we look at credit indebtedness, what the company needs to provide to its partners. So this indebtedness is 1.2. It increased to 1.2 billion hryvnias. And in this condition, this company cannot be privatized, and we can assess this company in the and in the summer, the capitalization of the company was about 3 billion, or 270 million, and then it decreased to $60 million, and in hryvnia it's about 1 and 2 billion hryvnias. So it's about 1 billion hryvnias of fall. So the shares of the company show the real situation, and if we take a multiplication here, we will see the same situation. So this is what the state lost during last 1.5 years, and maybe someone should be responsible. People should be brought to responsibility. People who carried out activities, and in such a way the state lost 1.2 billion hryvnias. So we have a number of state Ukrenergo, and the shares were transferred to the state property fund, but the minister is not active in this sphere, and these shares somehow were not given to the state property fund. So, and as to state Oblenergo, Zaporizhzhia Oblenergo is the bright example of this, and criminal investigation is started, and the criminal proceedings were opened for the transfer of debt that were for the sum of 340 million hryvnias, and from the end of the 2014 they have indebtedness for they increased indebtedness for 700 million hryvnias, and they are in debt and debit.
While the receivables had grown 1.1 billion hryvnia, there is a huge growth, while there should not be such considerable growth under normal conditions. Why? Because of that assignments of shares which happened on the one hand. On the other hand, there is Zaporizhia ferroalloy plant which does not pay its accounts, and Oblenergo pretends they're happy with the situation. We discussed this situation several times, and came to conclusion that Zaporizhia ferroalloy plant could be supplies to it could be reduced up to the environmentally safe level, which might stimulate this company to pay its bills for the energy and to revive its production, or to close the company. So, the summary. If the company goes to the market and with its debts to the energy market, on the other hand, it has receivables from Zaporizhia ferroalloy and some assigned debts. So this might depreciate the value of this company, the Oblenergo. The state has 65% shares in the property of this company, but with all those debts, no external investors will come, and most probably there might be only internal investors, and who definitely won't pay fair price. About Kharkiv Oblenergo. The situation with Kharkiv Oblenergo is slightly different. They had several issues with sales of shares of securities, whether there were fraud with them or not. But they also have such a client as Kharkiv Vodokanal, that is Kharkiv Water Supply Company. They cut down their payments to the energy market to sign later a special agreement to produce a document that Kharkiv Water Supply Company has a non-profitable tariff. So based on those several examples, I would like to point out that the supervision of the state over situation in those companies which are going to be privatized is insufficient, is not satisfactory, and the government should change the rules, should respond to this improper situation, should strengthen the role of the regulator and the role of enforcement bodies in finding solutions to this situation. I believe that we are at the stage when the words are not enough. We have specific figures indicating that the state has been losing up to 1-2 billion of hryvnia in those companies, and actually a similar situation, if not of that scale, is in another companies. We have some 10-12 minutes more. Let us now ask questions. Please do not forget to mention your names and whom you represent. Good morning, I'm Tarnavska Yulia from Ukraine TV channel. I would ask you to sum up very briefly about the strategy of Ukrainian energy market, what strategy we should have and how it should be implemented. As of today, we have in force the law number 663 on the electric energy market, which complies with the third energy package signed by Ukraine. And in line with this law, all the previous laws on the electricity market will be repealed, and this will bring us to a more liberal market that will be opened export and import energy markets, which would allow our producers to go to outer markets. But on the other hand, we might have another producers who will come to Ukraine, and our producers will shrink their production, their generation. On the one hand, this is first important moment. The second, this will be the market tailored for the consumers. And consumers will feel themselves better in the market. Consumers will have a variety of tariffs, a menu of tariffs. It would be, he or she would be able to choose among suppliers. Even households would be able to go to the market. On the one hand, the households will optimize their consumption. On the other hand, the suppliers should provide a variety of tariffs. For example, the night tariff. As for regulatory role of the Cabinet of Ministers, of the Ministry of Fuel and Energy, and of the National Commission on Tariffs and Municipal Utilities, Municipal Utility Services, they should strengthen practical cooperation with the energy community and develop necessary bylaws to implement that framework law which I just mentioned. And the law requires these bylaws to be passed, and it also requires settling the relations with transboundary electricity suppliers. Dykhtyarenko, Energy Research Center. Andriy, my question is to you. You mentioned Zaporizhia, Oblenergo, Kharkiv, Oblenergo. As for the mutual settlements. But this decision is made annually at the Cabinet of Ministers sitting. Does it mean that the main corruptioners, main corrupt people are in the Cabinet of Ministers? I think that people who are in the Cabinet of Ministers, the Minister of Finance, etc., they are not familiar with the situation on site, and if they have all necessary documents that the tariffs were lower than the actual production expenses, then they rely on these documents. And as far as I know, for this year, there is no compensation from budget for the difference in tariffs, and they suggest that the tariffs should be economically well based, and which means that there won't be such things in the future, I mean this year. So we need to change some tariffs, but not on the account of subsidies paid to Oblenergo. My question is again to Andriy Gerus. I'm Gorlishka Alexander from Zhitlo magazine. You mentioned about the assignment of debts. You also mentioned transmission units, transmission stations of which belong to aggregation. But about consumers who now have to pay for the investments made by those companies who should invest. Actually, there is a theft from the pockets of consumers. How the households could control those investments in the bills? Actually, tariffs are like taxes. Of course, consumers might decrease consumption, but thus they might be able to decrease the bills, to cut down the bills, but not more than by 20%. Actually, the elasticity is negligible here. I think that the only solution might be in very strong role of a regulator. So we need to have a strong regulator, and maybe under the auspice of this regulator, we should have a sort of energy ombudsman who might respond to the appeals from households. Sometimes we hear that the energy tariffs in Ukraine should be the same as in Europe. I'm not sure about this because the Big Mac in McDonald's in Ukraine costs differently than in Europe, for example, because the input resources price is different, and that's why I think that we should build the capacity of the independent regulator, strong independent regulator, and allow them to have a special section dealing with appeals from consumers. Quite often journalists ask what could be done at the level of individual consumers or households. There is an illusion that individual strategies of individual households require might resolve the issue. The issue which should be resolved by collective strategies. That is, the rights of consumers should be represented in the body which is responsible for development of the collective strategy. There is a very sensitive topic. You mentioned privatization. We currently look for the effective managers. We have some experience with those international experts who express interest in management that they reject from this. I would like to remind you about joint stock companies where consumers would not have their voice. 200 years ago, 100 years ago, when the Kiev tram was launched, this was a joint stock company with a big capital from Kiev residents. This was the level of trust among people to joint stock companies with state shares. Let's sum up. Today we heard about the liberal market, but how the state will regulate the participation of households in those liberal markets. This is still the issue. Probably we have not answered all the questions, but we raised these questions, pointed out to them, and we remain in touch with you. We will try to find the answers to important questions together, and I hope that due to the energy strategy, we would be able to reach that more liberal market which we wish to have. But I hope that this won't be just losses, taxes, and high tariffs for consumers, but something more optimistic. Thank you very much, and see you next time.